The massive crystalline chamber stretched impossibly far in every direction, its walls pulsing with veins of blue light that carried the thoughts and whispers of 1,000 different species. Ambassador David Kane stood perfectly still in the center of a glowing circle, his hands clasped behind his back as he faced the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. The air itself seemed to vibrate with authority and ancient power. Above him, floating in anti-gravity pods that defied the laws of physics he had learned as a child, sat the Galactic Council of Supremes. These were beings whose civilizations had conquered entire star systems before humanity had even discovered agriculture. Their very presence made the chamber feel smaller despite its enormous size. The Vorthak Chancellor leaned forward, its 6 crimson eyes focusing on the lone human below. When it spoke, its voice traveled through neural translators that made every word feel like a physical impact against David's mind. "Human representative," the Chancellor began, each syllable dripping with barely contained disgust. "Your primitive species stands accused of crimes that defy comprehension. The complete annihilation of our 3rd battle fleet, the systematic destruction of 17 colonial worlds, the dismantling of military installations that had stood unconquered for 3,000 years. David remained motionless, his gray eyes scanning the assembled representatives with careful precision. To his left sat the insectoid hive mother, her mandibles clicking with impatience as her thousands of compound eyes reflected the chamber's light. Behind her, the ethereal void speakers whispered among themselves in frequencies that made reality itself seem to shimmer and bend. At the far end of the semicircle sat Emperor Kalesh, the being whose empire had consumed half the galaxy over the course of 3 millennia. His massive form crackled with barely contained energy, ancient scars crisscrossing his crystalline hide like battle maps of forgotten wars. "Speak, primitive creature," the Chancellor roared, its tentacles thrashing in agitation. "Your homeworld burns as we conduct this tribunal. Your pathetic fleets have been scattered like dust across the void. What possible defense could your species offer for such unprecedented aggression?" For a long moment, silence filled the vast chamber. The only sound was the gentle hum of the life support systems that allowed hundreds of different species to coexist in the same space. Then David smiled, a cold and calculating expression that seemed completely out of place given his circumstances. "Defense?" he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite its softness. "Honored members of the Council, I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about why I am here." He reached slowly into his jacket, and instantly, the chamber erupted into defensive action. Energy shields flared to life around the council members. Weapon systems that had been hidden in the walls suddenly revealed themselves, all targeting the human in the center. Guards materialized from cloaked positions throughout the chamber. David withdrew a simple data pad, holding it up so the floating recording drones could capture its display. "I am not here to defend humanity's actions," he continued, his smile growing wider as confused murmurs rippled through the assembly. "I am here to formally accept your unconditional surrender." The chamber exploded into chaos. Alien shrieks and roars of outrage echoed off the crystalline walls. Several of the smaller species representatives fell from their pods in shock. The hive mother's clicking became a deafening crescendo of rage. But David was not finished. "You see, while you have been busy organizing this impressive display of authority," he said, holding up the data pad so its screen was visible to everyone present, "the Sol Defense Grid has completed its primary objective. Every hyperspace lane leading to this system has been, shall we say, compromised." The data pad screen showed a real-time tactical display that made several council members gasp in horror. Dozens of massive energy signatures surrounded their home system like the closing fingers of an enormous fist. Ships that registered as impossible on their sensors, wielding technology that shouldn't exist. "Allow me to explain something about humanity," David said conversationally, as if he were discussing the weather, rather than announcing the fall of the galaxy's greatest empire. "We have a saying that goes like this: if you're going to take a shot at the king, you had better not miss. 3 months ago, your empire made the decision to invade our world, thinking we were just another primitive species to be cataloged and conquered. Emperor Kalesh's voice boomed across the chamber like thunder rolling across a battlefield. "Impossible. Our intelligence networks are the most sophisticated in the galaxy. We monitored your species for decades. You barely achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago. Your intelligence was incomplete, David replied, his tone remaining perfectly calm despite the chaos around him. We have been watching you, learning from you, and preparing for you far longer than you realize. Every probe you sent to our system, every surveillance mission, every accidental encounter with human vessels at the edges of your territory. All of it was carefully orchestrated. The chamber fell silent as the implications began to sink in. The tactical display on David's datapad updated, showing the true extent of humanity's preparations. Hidden installations throughout the galaxy, infiltration of critical Imperial systems, technology that made the Empire's greatest weapons look like primitive tools. For the past century, David continued, humanity has been conducting the most elaborate intelligence operation in galactic history. We studied every aspect of your empire, your military tactics, your technological capabilities, your political structure, even your cultural weaknesses. We learned how you think, how you fight, and most importantly, how you can be defeated. The Void Speaker's whispers became a cacophony of panic as they realized the scope of humanity's deception. The Hive Mother's compound eyes reflected a new emotion and wire of fear. But how? Whispered the Zephyrian delegate, its crystalline voice barely audible. Patience. David answered simply, something your empire never learned. You expand rapidly, conquer quickly, and move on to the next target. We take our time. We plan, we prepare, and when we finally act, we make sure the outcome is never in doubt. The chamber's great display screens flickered to life, showing footage from across the galaxy. Imperial fleets surrendering without firing a shot. Planetary governors receiving humanity's terms of capitulation. The methodical, systematic dismantling of an empire that had ruled unchallenged for millennia. This is not a negotiation, David said firmly, his diplomatic demeanor replaced by something far more dangerous. This is a notification. The Galactic Empire's reign ended the moment you decided to attack Earth. What happens next depends entirely on how quickly you adapt to your new reality. Emperor Kalesh rose from his pod, energy crackling around his massive form. And what reality is that, human? David's smile returned, colder than the void between stars. The reality where humanity is the dominant power in this galaxy, and you are about to learn why the universe should have left us alone. The chamber fell silent once more, the weight of a changing galaxy settling over every being present. In the space of a few minutes, the natural order that had existed for thousands of years had been completely overturned. And the human standing in the center of it all looked like he was just getting started. 3 months earlier, the invasion fleet had arrived at Earth like a storm of living metal. Admiral Crane watched from the bridge of his flagship Devastator as his sensors analyzed the third planet's primitive defenses. What he saw made him smile with satisfaction. Satellites that looked like children's toys, space stations that couldn't survive a single plasma burst, and surface installations that appeared barely more advanced than chemical rockets. This will be finished before the day cycle ends, his tactical officer reported with confidence. Their technology registers as Level 2 civilization status at best. No energy shields, no particle weapons, no spatial manipulation capabilities. They don't even have proper military vessels in orbit. Crane nodded approvingly. The Empire had conquered 847 worlds in his lifetime, and this would be no different from the others. The humans would resist briefly with their primitive weapons, then submit to Imperial rule like every other species before them. Their planet would be strip-mined for resources, their population relocated to labor colonies, and their system would become just another administrative district in the ever-expanding empire. Begin planetary bombardment, Crane ordered, settling back in his command chair. Target their major population centers first. Leave enough infrastructure intact for resource extraction, but make sure they understand the futility of resistance. The first human ship appeared without any warning whatsoever. It simply materialized between his fleet and Earth, as if space itself had folded to deliver it to that exact location. Crane's sensors immediately began screaming contradictory readings. The vessel appeared to be constructed from materials that violated known physics, powered by energy sources that shouldn't exist, and protected by defensive fields that registered as impossible on every scanner. What in the void is that thing? Crane whispered, leaning forward in his chair. Before his tactical officer could even begin to formulate a response, the human ship opened fire. The beam that lanced out wasn't plasma or particle discharge. It was something far more terrifying. Pure annihilation energy. A weapon that deleted matter from existence rather than simply destroying it. 3 of Crane's most powerful dreadnoughts simply ceased to be, leaving not even molecular debris behind. Then came the shock that changed everything. "Admiral," his communications officer stammered, his voice shaking with disbelief. "I'm receiving a message from the human vessel. It's in perfect galactic standard, complete with proper military protocols and what appear to be classified encryption codes." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a woman in a pristine white uniform standing on a bridge that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Behind her, holographic displays showed tactical information that made Crane's blood freeze in his veins. Complete fleet compositions, classified weapon specifications, and strategic plans that only the highest levels of Imperial Command should have possessed. "I am Captain Lisa Torres of the Terran Defense Network," the woman said with calm authority. "Admiral Crane, you are hereby ordered to withdraw your forces from this system immediately. Consider this your only warning." "How do you know my name?" Crane demanded, his voice rising in pitch. "How do you know our fleet composition? Our mission parameters?" "Admiral," Torres replied with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever, "we have been monitoring your Empire's communications networks for the past 100 years. We know more about your military capabilities than your own intelligence services do." She gestured to something off-screen, and suddenly Crane's tactical display erupted with new contacts, dozens of them, appearing all around his fleet like predators emerging from tall grass. Ships that his sensors couldn't properly analyze, each one radiating power signatures that dwarfed his mightiest vessels. "You see, Admiral," Torres continued as more ships materialized around the Imperial fleet, "when humanity first detected your expansion into our galactic neighborhood, we faced a critical decision. We could reveal ourselves as another spacefaring civilization and hope for peaceful contact, or we could remain hidden and prepare for what we knew was inevitable." The number of human ships continued to grow at hundreds now, forming a perfect sphere around the Imperial fleet with mathematical precision. "We chose to prepare. 100 years of focused development, Admiral. 100 years of studying your technology, your tactics, your weaknesses, and your predictable patterns of expansion. 100 years of building defenses that your Empire cannot even begin to comprehend." Crane's fleet was now completely surrounded by vessels that seemed to bend light around themselves, their very presence warping space in ways that his instruments couldn't measure or understand. "This is impossible," he breathed, staring at the tactical display in horror. "Our reconnaissance mission surveyed this system extensively. There was no advanced civilization here, no infrastructure capable of supporting a space fleet. Your reconnaissance mission saw exactly what we wanted them to see," Torres replied with devastating simplicity. "Just as your intelligence networks have been feeding you carefully curated information about human capabilities for the past 50 years. Did you really think a species could develop faster than light travel without outside assistance, without study materials?" The implications hit Crane like a physical blow to the chest. The crashed Imperial probe from 50 years ago that had supposedly been lost in a stellar storm. The accidental transmission leaks that had given humanity access to basic galactic technology. The primitive human vessels that occasionally appeared at the edges of Imperial space, always just advanced enough to seem like natural technological progression. "We have been playing an extremely long game, Admiral," Torres said softly, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Every crashed probe, every intercepted transmission, every technological breakthrough your Empire experienced in this sector, all carefully orchestrated to guide your development in directions that would benefit our ultimate strategy." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of systems that could no longer make sense of what they were detecting. The human fleet had grown to surround not just Crane's forces, but the entire star system, with ships emerging from hiding places that shouldn't have been able to conceal anything larger than an asteroid. "The beautiful irony," Torres continued, "is that your Empire provided us with everything we needed to defeat you. Every advancement you made, we studied and improved upon. Every weapon you developed, we found counters for. Every tactical doctrine you employed, we learned to predict and exploit. What do you want from us?" Crane asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Want?" Torres laughed, and the sound was colder than the space between galaxies. "Admiral, we don't want anything from you. This isn't a negotiation or a diplomatic exchange. This is a notification that your Empire's expansion ends here, today at this moment." She leaned forward slightly, and Crane could see something in her eyes that made his species. Most hardened warriors look like children playing at war. You invaded our world thinking we were another primitive species to be conquered and catalogued. You were wrong about everything. Our technological level, our military capabilities, our willingness to fight, and most importantly, our patience. We have been waiting for this moment for a century, Admiral. Preparing for it, planning for it, and ensuring that when it finally came, the outcome would never be in doubt. The tactical display updated one final time, showing the true scope of humanity's preparations. Hidden installations throughout the galaxy, infiltration of critical Imperial systems, technology that made the Empire's greatest achievements look like primitive tools fashioned from stone and bone. Your choice now is simple, Torres concluded. Surrender your fleet and accept humanity's terms for the peaceful transition of power, or be destroyed where you float. Either way, the Galactic Empire's reign ends today. Admiral Crane stared at the display for a long moment, watching his career and his civilization crumble around him. Then, with the weight of inevitability crushing down on his shoulders, he reached for the communication controls to signal his fleet's surrender. Emperor Kalesh's throne room had never witnessed such chaos in its 3,000-year history. Military advisors from dozens of species shouted contradictory reports while holographic displays showed the impossible unfolding across the galaxy. Entire Imperial fleets simply vanishing from sensor networks like they had never existed at all. Explain to me. Kalesh rumbled, his massive crystalline form crackling with barely contained energy. How a species that achieved spaceflight 50 years ago is systematically dismantling an empire that spans 4,000 star systems. General Vex, his primary military strategist, manipulated a three-dimensional tactical display with trembling claws. The map showed a galaxy transformed our red markers indicating destroyed or missing fleets, yellow zones marking systems under human attack, and an ever-expanding sphere of green that represented confirmed human-controlled territory. My lord, Vex said, his voice tight with fear, we are facing an enemy that appears to know our every move before we make it. They're not just intercepting our communications, they're predicting our strategic decisions with impossible accuracy. It's as if they have access to our command structure's deepest secrets. Another advisor, a cybernetic being whose mechanical voice betrayed no emotion despite the dire circumstances, added his analysis. They have turned our own infrastructure against us, Your Majesty. Hyperspace lanes we have used for millennia are now death traps. Jump points that have been stable for thousands of years are somehow redirecting our ships into stellar cores or empty regions of space. Kalesh leaned forward on his throne, his ancient eyes focusing on the tactical display with laser intensity. Show me their fleet compositions. What kind of ships are they using? What technology? The display shifted, showing fuzzy sensor readings and corrupted data feeds. What emerged from the analysis was deeply unsettling. Human vessels that seemed to be constructed from technology that surpassed even Imperial understanding. Ships that could phase through solid matter at will, weapons that could reach across star systems to strike targets, and defensive systems that made the concept of physical damage seem irrelevant. Most disturbing of all, my lord, Vex said quietly, is that they appear to be using modified versions of our own technology, but improved beyond all recognition, enhanced in ways our greatest scientists claim should be impossible. A new voice suddenly cut through the discussions, cold, human, and emanating directly from the chamber's main communication array despite every security protocol in existence. Your Imperial Majesty, the voice said with mock formality that dripped with barely concealed contempt. This is Admiral James Patterson of the Terran Expeditionary Force. I hope you are enjoying our little demonstration of advanced military tactics and security systems throughout. The chamber screamed alerts as they desperately tried to trace the signal's origin, but the human voice continued unperturbed by their efforts. We thought it was time for a proper introduction, since we have been so rudely excluded from galactic politics for the past several millennia. My name is Admiral Patterson, and I represent what you might call humanity's diplomatic outreach program. Kalesh's roar of rage shook the chamber's foundations, causing several of the smaller advisors to stumble. How dare you breach our most secure communications networks? Show yourself, human. Oh, but I am showing myself, Your Majesty, Patterson replied with obvious amusement. I suggest you look around with more attention to detail. The chamber's walls suddenly became transparent, revealing what should have been impossible, A human fleet surrounding the imperial capital itself. Massive vessels hung in space like predatory birds of prey, their surfaces shifting and changing as if they were alive rather than constructed. The imperial defense grid that had protected the capital for 3,000 years was simply gone, as if it had never existed. You see, Patterson's voice continued conversationally, while your fleets have been chasing shadows and phantoms in the outer territories, we have been taking a more direct approach to diplomacy. Your capital's defensive systems were quite impressive, by the way, or rather they were impressive, until we decided they weren't necessary anymore. On the tactical display, an analysis of the human ships began to form automatically. What the computers revealed defied every principle of known science and vessels that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Weapons that could manipulate fundamental forces of physics, and energy sources that appeared to tap directly into the fabric of reality itself. How is this possible? Kalesh whispered, his voice barely audible above the chaos in the chamber. Excellent question, Your Majesty, Patterson replied as if he had somehow heard the Emperor's quiet words across impossible distances. The answer might surprise you considerably. We did not invent this technology from nothing. We learned it. We studied it. We improved upon it. And our greatest teacher was your own empire. The display shifted again, showing archived footage from across the empire's long history, crashed ships being recovered, ancient technology being excavated from archaeological sites, lost probes being salvaged from the edges of known space. But now the footage was annotated with human analysis, showing how each discovery had been carefully cataloged, reverse-engineered, and improved upon. Every piece of wreckage your ships left behind over the centuries, every lost probe that drifted into unexplored space, every abandoned outpost from your early expansion period. For thousands of years, Your Majesty, your empire has been leaving a trail of technological breadcrumbs for us to follow, and we have been exceptionally good students. The true scope of humanity's infiltration became clear as the display showed a timeline spanning millennia, human observers at the very edges of imperial space, carefully hidden but always watching, subtle influences on imperial research directions that guided development along specific paths, technological discoveries that nudged imperial science toward conclusions that would ultimately benefit human understanding. The beautiful irony of your situation, Patterson continued with obvious enjoyment, is that you created your own defeat through your own success. Every advancement your empire made, we studied and improved upon in secret. Every weapon you developed, we found counters for. Every tactical doctrine you employed, we learned to predict and exploit to our advantage. Kalesh's rage was building to dangerous levels, reality itself beginning to warp and bend around his throne as his power reached critical thresholds. Enough! What do you want from us, human? What are your terms? Terms? Patterson's laughter echoed through the chamber like the sound of breaking glass. Your Majesty, I think you fundamentally misunderstand the nature of this conversation. This is not a negotiation between equals. This is not a diplomatic exchange or a discussion of surrender conditions. The human fleet around the capital began moving in perfect synchronization, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. This is a notification that the Galactic Empire's 3,000-year reign has come to an end. Humanity is now the dominant power in this galaxy, and we are here to discuss the terms of your complete and unconditional surrender. The only choice you have left is whether that surrender comes peacefully or through the complete annihilation of everything you have built. In the deepest archives beneath the surface of Earth, Dr. Elena Martinez walked through corridors that officially did not exist on any government record. The walls around her were lined with artifacts and technologies that would have been considered impossible just months before the Empire's invasion, had forced humanity to reveal capabilities that defied every known law of physics and engineering. You wanted to understand how we accomplished what your analysts are calling impossible, she said to the small group following her through the underground complex. The delegation included former Imperial officers who were now prisoners of war, alongside several representatives from neutral systems who had desperately requested an explanation of humanity's sudden emergence as the galaxy's dominant military power. This facility represents approximately 800 years of continuous preparation and development, Elena continued as they walked deeper into the complex. What you are about to witness will fundamentally change your understanding of galactic history and humanity's true place in the cosmic order. She led them into a massive chamber where the walls themselves seemed to pulse with an inner life force. Strange geometries twisted through the space in ways that hurt to contemplate, creating pathways that led in directions that should not have been possible within normal three-dimensional space. At the center of the chamber stood a pillar of crystalline material that radiated energy patterns unlike anything in any known database of galactic science. "We call this the archive," Elena explained, her voice taking on a reverent tone, "and it represents technology that is definitely not of human origin." General Thorne, a decorated Imperial officer whose fleet had been among the first to surrender, stepped forward with obvious confusion. "That is completely impossible, Doctor. Our historical records clearly show that humanity only achieved basic spaceflight within the last century. Before that point, your species was confirmed to be a primitive planetary civilization with no advanced technology whatsoever." Elena smiled with the patience of someone who had been expecting exactly that response. "Your historical records are incomplete in ways you cannot imagine, General. They begin approximately 4,000 years ago, when your empire's expansion reached what you call the Great Barrier in the galactic core region. Do you have any idea what that barrier actually represents?" She gestured toward the crystalline pillar, and suddenly the chamber filled with holographic displays showing star charts that spanned millions of years of galactic history. The familiar galaxy map appeared, but it was overlaid with patterns that revealed a startling and impossible truth. The Empire's expansion had been carefully guided and deliberately limited by forces that remained completely invisible to Imperial science. The Great Barrier is not a natural phenomenon, created by stellar mechanics. "General," Elena said as the displays showed the true scope of the hidden influences, "it is a quarantine zone established and maintained by advanced technology. And behind that barrier lie the remains of a civilization that your empire never encountered, because they had already transcended physical existence long before your species achieved consciousness." The displays shifted dramatically, showing ruins of scope and scale that dwarfed entire star systems. Megastructures that treated the laws of physics as polite suggestions rather than absolute limitations. Technology that existed in dimensions beyond normal space-time. And archives containing the accumulated knowledge of species that had solved the riddle of mortality itself. "The precursors," whispered Dr. Cass, a Vorthak xenoarchaeologist who had been included in the delegation. "The theoretical advanced civilization that some of our scholars believed might have existed before any recorded galactic history." "Not theoretical at all," Elena corrected gently. "Very real, very advanced, and definitely not gone in any meaningful sense. When they transcended physical existence approximately 10 million years ago, they left behind caretakers, guardians whose purpose was to watch over and guide the younger species that would eventually fill the galaxy they had left behind." She approached the crystalline pillar and placed her hand against its surface. Suddenly the chamber was filled with presence, ancient beyond comprehension, vast beyond measurement, and unmistakably aware of every being in the room. The Imperial officers instinctively reached for weapons that had been confiscated, while the neutral delegates fell to their knees in instinctive recognition of something far greater than themselves. Humanity was chosen to serve as those guardians, Elena continued as the presence settled around them like a gentle tide of pure consciousness. Not because we were special or advanced compared to other species, but because we demonstrated certain qualities that the precursors considered essential: adaptability, curiosity, and the capacity for growth beyond our initial limitations. The holographic displays now showed Earth's true history, not the primitive world that Imperial scouts had catalogued, but a carefully maintained preserve where humanity had developed under the subtle guidance of forces beyond galactic understanding. Every major technological breakthrough, every evolutionary leap, every social advancement had been gently shepherded by influences that remained invisible to outside observation. For 8,000 years, Elena explained as the displays showed the scope of the preparation, humanity has been developing in ways that your Empire's scouts could never detect. Not just advancing technologically, but growing in wisdom and understanding. The precursor's legacy is not simply knowledge and power. It is the responsibility to nurture and protect all conscious life throughout the galaxy. General Thorne's voice was barely a whisper, as the implications became clear. The Empire's expansion, our conquests, our entire civilization, was allowed to develop and continue because conflict drives evolutionary growth, Elena finished for him. But only up to a certain point. Your empire has reached the limits of what the galaxy can sustainably support through aggressive expansion. The time has come for a fundamental change in how galactic civilization operates. The presence in the chamber grew stronger, and suddenly every being present could feel the vast network of consciousness that extended throughout the galaxy. Millions of species, billions of individual minds, all connected in ways that the Empire's aggressive expansion had disrupted and damaged. "This is why your fleets could not defeat us," Elena said softly as the truth became undeniable. "We were not fighting you with purely human technology or tactics. We were fighting you with the accumulated wisdom and power of every civilization that has ever existed in this galaxy. The Precursor's greatest gift was not just knowledge, it was unity." The chamber's walls became transparent, revealing not the surface of Earth but something far more profound, a view of the galaxy as it truly existed, with streams of light connecting every inhabited world, every thinking being, in a vast web of consciousness that the Empire had never suspected. "Welcome to the true galactic community," Elena said to the stunned delegation as they witnessed the reality that had been hidden from Imperial science for millennia. "And now, let us discuss how your people can join this community peacefully, before humanity is forced to make that decision for them through less gentle means." The crystalline pillar pulsed with renewed energy, and the ancient presence in the chamber seemed to smile with satisfaction that transcended physical form. After millennia of patient waiting, the galaxy was finally ready to take its next step toward true unity and cosmic responsibility. 6 months after the last Imperial stronghold had formally surrendered, Ambassador David Kane stood once again in the great crystalline chamber of the Galactic Council. But the massive space now hosted a completely different kind of gathering, one that would have been unimaginable during the Empire's reign of terror and conquest. Representatives from every known species filled the chamber, but not as conquerors facing the conquered. Instead, they participated as equals in the first truly democratic galactic assembly in recorded history. The floating pods that had once held the Empire's elite now carried delegates who had been chosen by their own people through free elections, and the ancient architecture itself seemed brighter and more alive than it had ever been before. "The transition has exceeded our most optimistic projections," Admiral Torres reported to the assembly, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "Former Imperial worlds are experiencing unprecedented levels of peace and prosperity. Trade routes that were once exclusively military highways now carry cultural exchanges, scientific collaborations, and artistic endeavors between species that had not spoken to each other in thousands of years." The central holographic display showed a galaxy completely transformed from its previous state. Where once there had been rigid imperial boundaries separating conquered territories, now there were voluntary alliances, cooperative research initiatives, and something that had never existed before in galactic history, truly unified galactic civilization built on principles of mutual respect, rather than domination through force. Emperor Kalesh himself sat in one of the standard delegate pods, his massive crystalline form somehow appearing diminished but far from defeated. When he spoke, his voice still carried the gravity and authority that commanded attention despite his fallen status and the complete dissolution of his former empire. "I have ruled this galaxy for 3 millennia, he said slowly, each word carefully measured. "I have witnessed the rise and fall of more than 1,000 different civilizations. I have seen wars that consumed entire star systems and peace treaties that lasted for centuries. But I have never witnessed transformation on this scale occurring so peacefully and completely." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber like gentle waves. The dissolution of the Galactic Empire had been accomplished not through the bloody revolution that everyone had expected, but through a process that could only be described as guided evolution. Imperial forces had simply laid down their weapons as they witnessed the genuine alternative that humanity offered to replace their system of conquest and oppression. "The question that continues to haunt my thoughts," Kalesh continued, his ancient eyes scanning the assembled representatives, "is whether this outcome was always inevitable from the beginning. Whether my empire, our endless conflicts, our aggressive expansion across the galaxy, whether all of it was merely preparation for this exact moment in galactic history." Dr. Martinez, now serving as Earth's primary liaison to the galactic community, nodded thoughtfully from her position near the central podium. Your Majesty asks exactly the right question, and one that deserves a complete answer. The truth is both yes and no, in ways that are more complex than they might initially appear. She gestured toward the great display, which now showed not just the current state of the galaxy, but a timeline stretching back millions of years. Patterns became visible to the assembled delegates were cycles of expansion and consolidation, periods of conflict followed by eras of cooperation, each building on the previous to create ever greater complexity and unity among the galaxy's countless species. The precursors' plan did require a period of significant conflict to drive technological and social development. Across the galaxy, Elena continued, your empire served that purpose more effectively than any previous civilization in galactic history. The pressure you created forced species to innovate, to cooperate with each other, and to develop beyond their initial limitations. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in before continuing with the more difficult part of the explanation. But the plan also required that this period of conflict end at precisely the right moment in galactic development, too early, and the galaxy's various species would not have been ready for true cooperation and unity, too late, and the conflicts would have become too destructive for any civilization to recover from the damage. A new voice joined the conversation, Ambar, ancient beyond measure, vast beyond comprehension and speaking directly into the minds of every conscious being present. It was the collective consciousness of the precursors, no longer hidden behind barriers but openly participating in galactic affairs for the first time in millions of years. We have watched from the shadows, the voice said, carrying harmonics that resonated across all species barriers and communication methods. We have guided when guidance was needed. We have waited with infinite patience. The galaxy is now ready for its next phase of evolutionary development. Therine, chamber fell completely silent as the true scope and scale of the ancient plan became clear to everyone present. Not just the integration of existing civilizations into a peaceful galactic community, but preparation for something far greater and more ambitious than anyone had imagined possible. The galactic community we are building together right now, David said quietly, his voice carrying despite its softness, is not an end goal or a final destination. It is a foundation for something much larger. There are other galaxies scattered throughout the universe, other groups of civilizations that have reached their own crossroads between cooperation and destruction. Some have chosen the path of unity and mutual growth. Others have not been so fortunate. The display expanded beyond their own galaxy, showing the vast cosmic web of galactic clusters and the subtle but detectable signals that indicated which had achieved harmony and which remained locked in destructive cycles of warfare and conquest. Humanity's role as guardians extends far beyond just our own galaxy, Elena explained to the fascinated assembly. We are preparing to make contact with our cosmic neighbors, not as conquerors seeking to expand our territory, but as teachers offering to share the gift of unity with civilizations that are still trapped in their own cycles of empire building and rebellion. The implications were staggering in their scope and ambition, not just galactic peace within their own spiral arm, but cosmic responsibility extending throughout the observable universe. The chamber buzzed with excited discussions, as species representatives realized they were witnessing the birth of something unprecedented. A civilization dedicated not to its own expansion and dominance, but to the elevation and enlightenment of all conscious life throughout existence itself. Kalesh's voice cut through the noise with its familiar authority. And what happens if these other galaxies refuse your offer of peace and cooperation? What if they choose to remain as my empire was built on conquest, domination, and the subjugation of weaker species? David's smile was the same cold expression that had first chilled the tribunal months ago, when everything had begun. Then, Your Former Majesty, they will learn exactly what you learned during our brief conflict. This galaxy now possesses a new definition of overwhelming force and the wisdom to use it responsibly. And this time, we have both the patience and the knowledge to ensure lasting peace. The chamber erupted not in outrage or fear, but in something humanity had given the galaxy for the first time in recorded history, a genuine hope for a better future. Hope that the endless cycles of conquest and destruction could finally be broken forever. Hope that consciousness itself could evolve beyond the primitive need for dominance and control. As the assembly moved toward its first formal vote, to send peaceful contact missions to neighboring galaxies. The precursor's presence filled the chamber one final time with unmistakable satisfaction. "The students have become teachers," the ancient voice declared with profound approval. The cycle continues to turn, but the spiral ascends toward greater wisdom. The universe itself grows more conscious and aware, and in the vast crystal chamber where an empire had once plotted endless conquest, the first truly universal civilization took its first tentative steps toward a future that no single species could have imagined alone. But that all of them, working together in harmony, were finally ready to build with confidence and hope.